Hello, I'm a family doctor in Vancouver, British Columbia. I've been learning more about nutrition in the past few years, and this led me to take a course presented by Dr. Colin Campbell called Plant-Based Nutrition. I'm very excited to discover that there really is a lot we can all do to improve our well-being and decrease the chances of being ill just by making different choices in what we eat. Let's start with a list of major health conditions that affect us in the developing world. All of us are affected by the conditions known as chronic diseases. You or someone in your immediate family likely has one or more of these conditions. They include heart disease and stroke, diabetes, cancer, hip fractures and osteoporosis, and arthritis and other autoimmune diseases. This slide represents how healthcare dollars were spent in the United States in 1996. It shows us that 3/4 of healthcare resources were spent managing these conditions. The largest three segments alone make up 65% of the total, and in fact only four smaller segments of this graph, suicide, lung disease, pneumonia, and accidents, don't have a direct link to our diet. So back to protein. We're going to be discussing protein in these three sections. First, I'll go through some of the basic information about what a protein is. Then I'll show you some information linking one category of protein, animal source protein, to chronic disease. And then we'll look at how this applies to our diet. Okay, first some basics about protein. Nutrition is the study of nutrients, and a nutrient is a substance that an organism needs to live and grow and that must be taken in from the environment. So the things that we need to take in to survive include what we call food, as well as oxygen and water, but the area of nutrition generally is understood to include the topic of food. Nutrients are divided into two categories. Macronutrients, or large nutrients, we need to take in relatively large amounts, and they include carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Micronutrients include substances such as vitamins and minerals that we need to take in relatively tiny amounts. Again, there are only three macronutrients: protein, carbohydrates, and fat, and each of them have specific roles in our bodies. Protein is used as a building block, for example, in making muscle cells, and it's used to build chemicals that affect how our metabolic processes operate. These important substances function as messengers that carry information from one part of our body to another and are called hormones, or they are specialized substances that affect how chemical processes operate in our bodies and are called enzymes. Carbohydrates are the fuel source for all processes in our bodies. They are to our bodies what gas is to a car. And fats are storage forms of energy. They are the system that we evolved to store energy for times when food sources were scarce. Proteins are very large molecules. They are built from smaller components that are called amino acids. Proteins are built similarly to a number of colored beads on a string, and the order of the beads creates the specific protein. The proteins of us humans are made from 22 different amino acids. About half of these are called essential amino acids because our bodies cannot make them, and the rest we can make by modifying the ones that we eat. One of the defining characteristics of protein is that it contains nitrogen. Basically, all of the nitrogen in our body is related to protein. Okay, now that we know a bit about what protein is and what it does in our bodies, how much do we need? One way of measuring this is called the estimated average requirement. Proteins and other parts of our bodies are constantly being recycled, old structures broken down, and new ones rebuilt. The estimated average requirement was calculated by measuring how much nitrogen is removed from our bodies on a daily basis in urine and stool. As I mentioned earlier, mostly all of the nitrogen in our body is related to protein, and from the amount removed, we can determine how much protein we need to take in food to replace it. This amount is 0.5 to 0.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. Another way of describing our nutritional requirement is called the Recommended Daily Allowance, or RDA. This is the amount we see on the side panel of food packaging. It is an amount that is calculated to include a safety factor, and it is the amount which provides a sufficient amount for 98% of people. This amount is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. The important thing to keep in mind about this is that it is not the minimum amount, but the complete amount needed for basically everyone, 98% of the population. Conveniently, this amount works out to about 10% of total calorie intake. It is the amount recommended by the World Health Organization of the United Nations and by health departments of the United States government. What does this amount mean in a diet? For a 40-kilogram woman, it would be 32 grams of protein per day, and for a 60-kilogram man, 47 grams of protein per day. Where do we get protein? As in this picture of the Canada Food Guide, we have been trained to think that there is a particular group of food called protein. In this image, protein is identified in the red section and includes things like meat, eggs, fish, or beans. In fact, all food contains protein in varying amounts, especially if the foods are in their natural and unprocessed forms.